They always say that you should never go back to where you had success previously because you run the risk of ruining your legacy. There are of course always exceptions to the rule, but there are few examples of people eclipsing their past achievements at a former club, and oftentimes even the most successful returns still fall short of their previous stint. And then there's Paul Pogba's return to Juventus, a move that has gone so colossally bad for both Pogba and Juventus that it's almost difficult to even judge his move. The man has barely played. We have no data at a footballing level to really judge his actual gameplay for Juventus. But when it comes to value for Juve, of course this has been an absolute disaster. While paying him somewhere in the region of 8 million euros per season previously, Pogba has made just 12 appearances for Juventus since the start of the 2022-23 season. And if that number sounds small to you, it gets worse. Of those 12 appearances, he hasn't started a single match. Across those 12 appearances, he has played a total of 213 minutes, an average of 17.75 minutes per appearance. While injuries had already made his return to Juventus an awkward and difficult one to navigate both for Pogba and the club, the latest events, this doping controversy you've likely heard of, could make his second stint at the minimum difficult to see as a success when all is said and done, and at the maximum, it could be over already if their worst fears come true. Hey guys, and welcome to Rabona TV. I'm Adrian, and thank you for joining me in today's video. If you're new around here and want more detailed explainer videos, then go ahead and subscribe. But a warm welcome back to all of you who have subscribed already. Let's go through what's happened so far with Pogba, the results of both samples Pogba provided, other examples we can look to get an idea of how his ban could potentially go, as well as how this will affect his career in general. It's been very tough on him already, but let's jump back a couple of months. While he did partake in this season's preseason, Pogba spent the entirety of Juve's season opener away at Udinese on the bench. Juve won that match 3-0, never needing to rush Pogba back into the fray to save the result. Despite not playing a single minute in that game, Paul Pogba was chosen for a random doping test, as always happens at matches, to which he obliged. There's a delay on the results of these tests, and so Pogba went on to feature in Juve's next two Serie A matches. He came on as a substitute in their home draw against Bologna, and later entered the fray for the final half hour in their win against Empoli. Following that match, however, Allegri said that Pogba finished his Empoli cameo with a sore back and that he may be out for a couple of weeks. This was right before the international break, so there was confidence in Pogba being able to get healthy once again prior to Juve's next match in just under 2 weeks. However, as the international break was coming to an end, it was announced that Paul Pogba had tested positive for testosterone at higher levels than accepted by the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, the agency that governs doping for sport at the highest level, as well as the Italian Olympic Committee, which also takes part in these doping investigations. Pogba was immediately placed under a temporary suspension from competing with Juventus as this investigation was kicked off, as anyone who is being investigated for doping isn't allowed to compete until their name is cleared or their ban length is determined and then served. Given the nature of what was happening and how unavailable Pogba had been previously, many publications started to speculate that Juventus was going to see what their options were as far as a potential contract termination. As if he had taken the substances deliberately and knowingly, then that is absolutely grounds for a termination. That would have been convenient for Juventus financially. But speaking of which, you also had some reports coming out of France via the publication L'Equipe that Pogba's 8 million euro per year salary was reduced during his ban, the Serie A minimum, the lowest amount that a player can be compensated. On top of that, L'Equipe claimed that Pogba's been banned from Juve's training grounds during his suspension and that he isn't allowed direct contact with club officials. And as we'll hear later from another individual, there's reason to believe that, as that happened to them. Of course, as with any decent justice system, Pogba has the right to contest the results via the B sample. Now, when drug tests are conducted, there are 2 samples taken in order to avoid any strange variances that may lead to an inaccurate test. After his first sample came back positive for abnormal levels of testosterone, which can be the outcome of some sort of performance-enhancing drug, Pogba then requested that his B sample be tested to see if there was some sort of anomaly from the A sample. And it's a great thing that he did indeed get the counter-analysis completed, as the results found that it wasn't just straight up synthetic testosterone that was found in his system, as was reported previously, but a drug called DHEA. I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce this, but you can read it on screen. You go ahead and give it a shot. Go ahead. But anyway, DHEA is a substance that causes the body to naturally increase production levels of testosterone, rather than straight up taking synthetic testosterone. Upon the revelation of this, Allegri spoke sympathetically toward Pogba, and depending on the translation that you read of his reaction to the results of Pogba's B sample, I've read a few, it kind of sounded like he was speaking in past tense in some of the translations. As Football Italia translated it, quote, "On a human level, I am very close to him. I knew him since he was a young boy. It is a great pity for all of football to lose a player who was special. It is a difficult moment for him, and we can only wish him the best." This is what I mean by depending on the translation and how it's sort of interpreted, because he could just be saying it would be a pity for football to lose him if he is to be deemed guilty, or it could be it's a pity to lose him because, hey, we think that he's guilty, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Anyway, DHEA is still a banned substance, so he's not out of jail yet, and you can still get a 4-year ban for taking it. However, there is some light at the end of this long, dark, and scary tunnel that Pogba has been trapped in lately. Let's look at two more recent examples of doping bans and how their investigations and or punishments played out. The most recent one you may remember from last season was that of José Luis Palomino of Atalanta, who was temporarily suspended starting in July of 2022 after he had tested positive for a banned substance, not the same one as Pogba, however. 4 months later, in November of 2022, Palomino was cleared of his ban. Why? Because he was able to prove that he hadn't intentionally taken the substance and that it was an accidental contamination. Even though he was able to have his name cleared and didn't pick up an additional suspension, he still missed out on 4 months of the season while the investigation was ongoing, which is something that is currently happening with Paul Pogba. His ban hasn't been determined, but he can't compete until his name is cleared. This is one of the biggest things, trying to prove that it was accidental for Paul Pogba. It doesn't clear you completely of any kind of ban, but it can reduce the ban for you from something that is career ending or altering, like a 4-year ban, to something that it still screws you over but doesn't end your career due to a mistake. It goes without saying that intentionally doping will see you receive the harshest punishment possible, and intentionally doping gives a club the right to terminate your contract. André Onana is another example of someone who was able to contend their original sentencing at the Court of Arbitration for Sport after he had tested positive for an illegal substance while he was still with Ajax, as CAS ruled that there was no significant fault for Onana when it came to the substance he took, as he was able to prove that it was an accident. However, athletes are still 100% responsible for everything that they put into their body. They can't pass the buck, as it doesn't matter if they hired a professional to consult them on what supplements they can take for training purposes, or a doctor who instructed them to take a certain pill to help them with sleep or a headache. They can't pass responsibility to the professional they consulted. Ultimately, the athlete still decided to take that substance. They weren't forced into it, and they must still take responsibility and the punishment that follows. That's what happened in Onana's case. Even though he proved that it was an accident, a mix-up, he still had to serve some time for the crime. What about the substance Pogba tested positive for? In particular, are there any examples of similar cases and their punishments? There is actually a very recent example by way of UFC fighter Bobby Green, who just last year, 2022, tested positive for DHEA and ended up serving a reduced ban. That reduced ban was still 6 months, however, because, well, as mentioned before, DHEA is still a banned substance in accordance with WADA ruling, and like we said, the athletes are 100% responsible for everything they take. Green was able to convince the United States Anti-Doping Agency, or USADA, that he had no idea that the DHEA he was taking was a banned substance, and that given it is an over-the-counter medication that you can purchase in the United States, he figured it couldn't be considered a performance-enhancing substance. It is indeed a performance-enhancing substance, but the shall we call it, ignorance of green, I think that's fair, that ignorance was deemed enough for the USADA to be lenient. And the fact that Green accepted responsibility and was compliant with their investigation led to a sentence of just 6 months rather than a year or 2. So this is the route that Paul Pogba is now going down: compliance with the investigation and trying to prove that he had taken the DHEA accidentally, most likely in some product that he was using for his rehabilitation to improve training, what have you. That's why you have perhaps seen headlines stating that Paul Pogba is having all of the products he has used in the last 4 to 6 months tested, both orally used or topically used. Creams, supplements, pills, etc. All of it tested in order to try and find out where the contamination came from. If he is successful in doing so and proving that it was an accident, then he will hope for his ban to only be for, I don't know, anything under a year, something similar to Green's ban of 6 months. Even though Pogba has been temporarily suspended for about a month already, the month that he has served so far does not count toward his ban ruling that is forthcoming. What he's served doesn't count toward the ruling. The ruling is on top of what he's already served. Now, I've seen some people say, hey, why doesn't he just take off to Saudi Arabia? Well, I understand where that sentiment and thinking comes from, as Saudi Arabia has been a get out of jail free card for teams who are looking to offload talent, more like a get out of jail compensated, I guess. The Saudi Pro League still complies with WADA's rules when it comes to anti-doping, so any ban that Pogba is to pick up would still need to be upheld by Saudi Arabian clubs. Whether he's banned for a few months or a few years, this is yet another brutal hang-up in Pogba's career. Where he was already losing some appeal due to his never-ending list of injuries, I really feel for the guy on a human level. Being away from the game can't be great for the mental health. And now this ban that he has where he can't be with his teammates or anything has got to be incredibly difficult. André Onana spoke about these difficulties when he went through his ban, saying, quote, "When you're banned, you can't set foot on the club's training pitch, can't go into the dressing room. We, Ajax, were league champions. I had played 60% of the games and I wasn't allowed to celebrate it. Some things in life don't depend on you and you just have to be pragmatic." He then went on speaking about how he wouldn't even have an international tournament to look forward to given he wasn't playing enough to be selected, and how people fail to get updated on news stories, saying, quote, "You can't even use the African nations as motivation, a target, because logic says you won't get there. Football turns its back. I was just trying to survive, come back better, try to always see the positive side, but sometimes you can't. It's the way you're perceived, too. It's doping. You're a drug addict. How are you going to explain to your parents that you've tested positive when you've never smoked or drunk? How do you get rid of this here? There will still be people who think I'm guilty. People don't always have time to be informed." Yeah, people are harsh. Pogba will probably pick up some sort of nickname like Pogboids or something like that some ragmag like The Sun and opposing fans will label him as a cheat, as they will have just read headlines about the initial testing and not follow that line any further. And all of this comes off of the back of also having his brother be involved in a scheme to extort Pogba for millions of euros. His own family member involved in this, man. It really be your own sometimes, huh? The final piece of a collection of letdowns for Pogba, from his body constantly failing him, to his family trying to extort money from him, and now this, and the fallout that will come as a product of it. I hope this video gave you guys a better idea of what's going on here, some more accurate details on what they really found in his sample and what's to come for Pogba. If you found this helpful, then a like is always appreciated, but beyond that, I thank you for spending your time with me, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.